The wedding hall was filled with light, music, and laughter. Golden chandeliers sparkled from the ceiling, and flowers covered every corner. Guests sat in neat rows, whispering and smiling, waiting for the vows to begin. The bride, dressed in a shining white gown, looked nervous but happy. The groom, tall, confident, dressed in a sharp black suit, stood beside her with a proud smile. Everything seemed perfect, at least on the surface. But perfection can break in a single moment. In the middle rows, a boy no older than 13 sat quietly. He had been silent the entire evening, watching everything with eyes too heavy for his age. His small hands were clenched together, resting on his knees. No one paid much attention to him. People assumed he was just another child present at the wedding, maybe a relative, maybe a family friend. But he wasn't just anyone. He was the groom's son. As the music faded and the priest prepared to begin the ceremony, the boy suddenly pushed his chair back. The sound was small, but in the silent hall it felt like thunder. Heads turned toward him. Guests frowned, surprised. Children were not expected to stand up during a wedding. The boy took a shaky breath. His heart raced. His chest felt tight, but something inside him refused to stay silent anymore. He walked forward, one step, then another, toward the stage. The sound of his shoes echoed against the marble floor. The bride blinked in confusion. The groom's smile froze. Whispers started among the guests. What is he doing? Is he going to give a speech? Whose boy is that? The boy reached the front. He stopped just a few feet away from his father, the man standing proudly at the altar, ready to start a new life. For a moment, the boy said nothing. He simply stared up at him, eyes dark, filled with something no one could quite read. Then, with trembling hands, he reached for the microphone resting on a stand nearby. His fingers curled around it. His voice was soft at first, almost breaking. Before this wedding continues, everyone needs to hear the truth. The hall fell into silence. Utter, heavy silence. The bride's lips parted slightly. The groom's expression hardened. Guests leaned forward, hearts beating faster. They had expected laughter, maybe a cute story from a child. But the tone of his voice carried no joy. It carried pain. The boy's hands shook as he held the microphone closer. His eyes scanned the crowd. Rows of strangers stared back at him, waiting. He felt their curiosity, their confusion. But behind their faces, he saw his mother's tired smile, her nights of silent tears, her strength when he cried into her arms. That memory gave him the courage to speak. "My name is Daniel," he said, his voice clearer now. "And I am his son." Gasps rippled through the audience. Heads turned toward the groom. Some guests whispered louder. The bride blinked again, her face pale. The groom shifted uncomfortably but forced a tight smile, as if hoping to dismiss this. "Daniel, not now," he started, but his son's words cut through the hall sharper than any blade. "He wasn't always the man you see standing here." The boy's voice grew stronger. He wasn't yelling, but every word landed heavy in the silence. People leaned closer without even realizing it. They could feel something coming, something unexpected. The groom's jaw tightened. His hands clenched at his sides. Daniel continued. "I know weddings are supposed to be about love, about starting fresh. But what about the people left behind when someone decides to start fresh? What about the ones who carry the broken pieces?" His words hung in the air. The bride's eyes darted from the boy to the man she was about to marry. She looked confused, uneasy, as if she suddenly didn't know him at all. Guests whispered again, louder now. "Is he serious? Left behind? What does he mean? Was he married before?" The groom's face was pale now. He stepped forward, trying to take the microphone back, but Daniel pulled it closer to his chest. For the first time, the boy looked directly into his father's eyes, unafraid. "You can smile in front of everyone," Daniel said softly. "But you can't hide what you did. Not from me." The crowd froze. No one dared move. The bride's hands trembled as she gripped her bouquet. The priest, standing awkwardly to the side, cleared his throat as if to calm the situation, but he, too, stayed silent. There was nothing to say. Daniel looked back at the crowd. His chest rose and fell quickly, but his eyes were steady. "I don't want to ruin this day," he said. "But lies ruin lives more than truth ever can." The words struck like a thunderclap. A bride's smile faded. A groom's mask cracked. A hall full of people held their breath, waiting. And in that silence, the wedding, so perfect, so beautiful, no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a battlefield where truth was about to be revealed, and no one could stop it. The bride whispered under her breath, almost to herself, "What truth?" Daniel heard her. Slowly, he turned his gaze toward her, his young face heavy with pain far beyond his years. "The truth about the man you're about to marry," he said. The guests froze. Some gasped again. Some placed hands over their mouths. All eyes turned to the groom, who stood rigid, trapped under the weight of his son's words. And just like that, the wedding hall, once full of laughter and music, was drowned in a silence so sharp it felt like the walls themselves were listening. The boy had spoken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The room had fallen so silent that even the sound of breathing felt too loud. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the boy standing at the front, clutching the microphone with trembling hands. His young face carried no smile, only shadows of pain and courage. The groom, standing tall just a few minutes earlier, now looked smaller, his shoulders tight, his jaw locked. The bride stared at him, her lips parted, her hand frozen around the bouquet as if the flowers themselves might slip away. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. But when he spoke again, his voice was steadier, almost as if the silence around him gave him strength. "You all see a man ready to marry," he said, his eyes moving across the hall. "A man dressed in a fine suit, standing proud, smiling as if his life has been perfect. But I know another side of him. The side no one talks about. The side that left my mother crying alone." A sharp gasp rippled through the crowd. Some guests exchanged shocked looks, others covered their mouths. The bride's face went pale, and she turned slowly toward the man standing beside her. The groom took a step forward. "Daniel, that's enough," he said, his voice firm but strained. "This is not the time, not the place." But the boy didn't lower the microphone. His hands were trembling, but his eyes didn't leave his father's face. "If not now, then when? You never told her, did you?" The bride blinked, confusion tightening her features. "Told me what?" she asked, her voice soft, fragile, yet demanding an answer. Daniel's eyes softened as he looked at her. For a moment, he didn't seem like a boy speaking to hundreds of strangers. He seemed like a child begging anyone, to finally listen. "My father wasn't always this man you see today," Daniel began again. "He had another life, another family. He had my mother, and he had me. And then, one day, he walked away. He left us behind, as if we were nothing more than pieces of a past he wanted to forget." The bride's hand dropped from the bouquet. The flowers brushed against the floor as her grip loosened. Guests gasped louder now, their whispers filling the air like a storm. "Is this true? He had a family before? Why didn't anyone know?" Daniel's voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. "I remember nights when my mother sat by the window, waiting for him to come back. I remember her telling me stories, trying to keep hope alive. But he never came. He never came, until today, dressed like a hero in a suit." His eyes burned, and he blinked quickly, fighting back tears. He wasn't always the man who could promise love. He was the man who broke it first. The bride stared at the groom, her chest rising and falling quickly. "Is this true?" she asked again, louder this time, her voice trembling. The groom's lips moved, but no words came out. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Finally, he whispered, "I wanted to tell you, but I thought." "You thought you could hide it," Daniel interrupted sharply, his voice filled with pain. "You thought you could erase us." The crowd was stunned. The whispers had turned into low murmurs, a wave of disbelief and judgment washing through the hall. Some people shook their heads. Others simply stared at the groom as if they were seeing him for the first time. The bride stepped back slightly, her eyes wide with hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. Her voice cracked, but it carried across the hall. The groom finally looked at her, his mouth struggling to form an explanation. "I was ashamed," he admitted. "I made mistakes I thought were buried in the past." But Daniel's voice rose again, cutting him off. "You didn't bury them. You buried us. You buried me. And every day, I had to live with the truth that my father chose to forget me." The boy's words pierced deeper than any knife. The bride's face softened as she looked at him, and for the first time, her eyes filled with tears. This wasn't just a child causing drama. This was a child carrying wounds that had never healed. Daniel's voice trembled again, but he didn't stop. "You can stand here and pretend to be the perfect man, but I know the truth. I lived the truth. I watched my mother fight to keep our lives together while you started a new one. And now you stand here, smiling, ready to do it again." The groom shook his head, his voice desperate now. "No, Daniel, it's not like that." "Then what is it like?" the boy asked sharply, his voice echoing across the hall. "Is she just another chapter you'll close when it gets too hard? Will you leave her the way you left us?" The bride gasped softly, her hand reaching for the table beside her to steady herself. Her knees felt weak. She looked at the groom, searching his face for answers, for anything that might make this pain vanish. But his silence said more than words ever could. The hall was filled with tension so thick that it seemed to press against the walls. No one moved. No one dared breathe too loudly. Daniel lowered the microphone slightly. His eyes glistened with tears. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to ruin this day. But I can't sit there and let lies build a marriage. Because lies ruin lives more than truth ever can." The guests sat frozen, their whispers now gone. The weight of the boy's words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and choking. The bride slowly turned toward the groom, her face streaked with tears. Her voice was soft, broken, but everyone heard it clearly. "Is this who you are?" she asked. "Is this the man I'm about to marry?" The groom tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled it back, clutching her gown instead. The distance between them felt larger than the entire hall. Daniel's breathing slowed. He lowered the microphone completely, his small shoulders slumping. He had said what he needed to say. The truth was out now, for everyone to hear. The silence returned, heavier than before. It wasn't the silence of beauty or respect, it was the silence of broken trust, of hearts cracking open. And in that silence, the bride stared at the man beside her with eyes that no longer held love, but doubt. The wedding hall no longer felt like a place of celebration. Moments ago, music and laughter had filled the air. Now, only silence and whispers remained, heavy like a storm waiting to break. The bride stood frozen in her shining gown, her bouquet trembling in her hands. She felt the eyes of every guest pressing against her, but the only eyes she cared about were the boys and the man standing beside her. Daniel had spoken words that no one expected. He had opened wounds that the groom had tried to bury. And now, all of that truth stood in the middle of her wedding, tearing it apart piece by piece. Her lips trembled as she looked at Daniel. The boy's face was pale, but his eyes burned with something raw, something honest. This wasn't the voice of a child playing games. This was the voice of someone who had carried pain for years. Then she turned slowly toward the groom, the man she was seconds away from calling her husband. His face was pale, his hands clenched tightly together, and his eyes refused to meet hers. That hurt her more than anything. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. But the silence in the hall made sure everyone heard. The groom's throat moved as he swallowed hard. His lips parted, but words failed him. His silence was an answer of its own. The bride's chest tightened. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind. She remembered their first meeting, his charm, his laughter, the way he made her believe she had finally found someone who would protect her heart. She remembered the late-night talks, the promises, the dreams of a future together. But now those memories felt like glass, shattering under the weight of the boy's words. Her knees felt weak, and she gripped the table beside her to keep from falling. The bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. Gasps echoed through the hall, but she barely noticed. Her eyes returned to Daniel, who was still holding the microphone close to his chest. His small body trembled, but his voice had carried the weight of truth strong enough to silence everyone. The bride's heart broke as she thought of the child's words, nights of waiting, a mother's tears, a father's absence. She could see it all in the boy's eyes, the years of pain that no child should ever carry. And then the fear struck her like a knife. What if this became her future too? What if the man she loved, the man standing in front of her, was capable of walking away again? What if she became another story whispered in pain, another woman left waiting at the window for someone who would never return? Her hands shook as she stepped back, creating a small but painful distance between her and the groom. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me you had a family before? That you had a son?" The groom's voice finally cracked through the silence. "I wanted to tell you," he said, his words rushed, desperate. I didn't know how. I thought it would scare you away. I thought if I showed you only the man I am now, not the man I was then, we could build something new." Tears filled the bride's eyes. She shook her head slowly. "Something new built on lies can never last." The guests whispered again, their voices sharp, judgmental. Every word cut into the air. He hid his son? How could he keep that from her? Poor boy, poor woman. The bride's heart pounded faster. She looked at Daniel again. His small shoulders seemed too heavy for his young body. And yet, she admired him. He had the courage to speak the truth that adults often buried in silence. Her fear grew stronger with every second. She looked at the man she thought she knew and saw someone else, a stranger who carried secrets, a man who had once walked away without looking back. "Will you leave me too?" she asked suddenly, her voice sharp, demanding. Her question cut through the whispers like a blade. The groom froze. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His silence was worse than any answer. Daniel's voice, soft but steady, filled the hall again. "I don't want her to go through what we did. I don't want her to wake up one day and realize the man she trusted most is gone. I couldn't sit and watch that happen again." The bride's breath hitched. Her heart ached for the boy, for his pain. She wanted to reach out and comfort him, but her own fear held her back. The truth was too heavy, too sudden. She took another step back. Her wedding gown rustled against the floor. She looked at the guests, at their stunned faces, at the priest standing silently like a statue. And then her eyes returned to the groom. The man she had loved now looked like someone she could not recognize. His shoulders sagged, his eyes begged for forgiveness, but his silence screamed guilt. Her hands trembled. Her voice cracked. "I don't know if I can marry a man who hides the truth. I don't know if I can marry someone who can leave his own blood behind." The hall gasped again, louder this time. The groom stepped forward quickly, his voice desperate. "Please, don't say that. I made mistakes, yes, but I am not that man anymore. I want to be better. I want to give you a life I couldn't give before. Please, don't let the past take away our future." The bride's eyes filled with tears, but her fear wouldn't let go. She looked at Daniel again. The boy lowered his gaze now, his strength fading after the storm of words. His small voice echoed in her memory, "Lies ruin lives more than truth ever can." And she knew he was right. The silence returned, heavier than before. The hall was no longer just a wedding venue, it was a courtroom of truth, with every guest acting as a silent judge. The bride felt her chest rise and fall quickly. She wanted to believe the man she loved, but doubt had already poisoned her heart. The truth was out, and nothing could erase it. Her fear whispered to her, if he left once, he can leave again. And as she stood there, staring at the groom through tears, she realized she no longer knew if she was about to marry the love of her life or a stranger who had already broken too many hearts. The bride's words still hung in the air like broken glass. "I don't know if I can marry a man who hides the truth." The groom stood frozen, his face pale, his breath shallow. The guests sat silent, staring at the stage as if they had stepped into a story too heavy to believe. And there, in the middle of it all, Daniel stood with the microphone pressed against his chest. His small shoulders rose and fell as he tried to calm the storm inside him. His throat ached, his eyes burned, but he knew he could not stop now. Too much had been left unspoken for too long. He lifted the microphone again. His voice was soft at first, almost like a whisper. You all see a boy standing here, ruining a wedding. But what you don't see is the nights I cried into a pillow, asking where my father was. What you don't see is my mother sitting by the window, holding hope that he would come back. Hope that never came true. The hall was silent again. The words cut deep, sinking into every heart. Daniel's voice trembled as he went on. When I was little, I used to draw pictures of him. Pictures of the man I thought he was. Strong, kind, the kind of father who would come home with gifts, who would sit beside me, who would cheer for me when I played outside. But the truth was, he paused, his lips shaking. He never came. I grew up drawing someone who was never there. The bride covered her mouth with her hand, tears rolling down her cheeks. The groom lowered his head, unable to look at his son. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their hearts heavy. Daniel swallowed hard. His small fingers gripped the microphone tighter. Every birthday, I told myself, maybe this year he will come. Maybe this year I'll hear his voice. But the only voice I heard was my mother's, telling me to be strong, telling me not to lose hope. And when I asked her why he never came, she smiled through her tears and said, "He loves you, Daniel, even if he's not here." His words broke, his voice shaking with pain. But love isn't real if you're never there. A sob echoed softly in the hall. Someone in the crowd wiped their eyes. Even strangers could feel the weight of the boy's truth. Daniel blinked quickly, fighting back tears. I grew up watching other kids with their dads. I watched them play soccer in the park, laugh at the dinner table, carry their kids on their shoulders. And I wondered, why not me? What was so wrong with me that my father didn't choose me? The groom flinched at those words. He closed his eyes, his jaw trembling. He wanted to speak, to shout, to explain, but the boy's voice drowned everything else. I waited, and waited, Daniel whispered. But waiting for someone who never comes hurts more than anything in the world. And now, seeing him here, smiling, ready to promise forever to someone else. I couldn't sit there. I couldn't let another person believe a lie I lived every day. The bride's body shook as tears rolled down her cheeks. She looked at Daniel as if her heart would break into pieces. Daniel turned his gaze toward his father now. His eyes were sharp, filled with years of pain no child should carry. You left us. You left me. And you think standing here in a suit erases that? You think wearing a smile makes you new? You can't erase me. You can't erase what you did. The groom stepped forward finally, his voice breaking. Daniel, please. But Daniel didn't let him finish. Do you know what it feels like to wait for someone who never comes? Do you know what it feels like to see your mother cry at night and still tell you it's okay? Do you know what it feels like to look at other families and wonder why yours was never enough? That's my life. That's the pain I live with every day. The boy's voice cracked, and for a moment he almost dropped the microphone. Tears rolled down his cheeks now, but he didn't hide them. He let the world see the truth that had lived inside him for so long. I didn't stand up today to hurt anyone, he said, his voice softer now, breaking apart. I stood up because I couldn't carry this pain alone anymore. I stood up because I couldn't let another person believe in something built on lies. If she marries you without knowing the truth, she will live my mother's life. And I can't watch that happen. The hall was silent except for the sound of soft sobs from a few guests. The bride took a step toward Daniel. She knelt slightly, her eyes level with his. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice was gentle. I believe you, she whispered. I can see the pain in your eyes. No child should ever have to feel what you felt. Daniel blinked at her. For the first time, someone had said those words to him. For the first time, someone had seen his pain and believed it without question. His chest tightened, But in that moment, he felt less alone. The groom, however, was shaking. His face was pale, his eyes wet. He looked at his son, then at the woman he loved, and guilt crashed over him like a wave. He whispered hoarsely, "I thought I could leave the past behind. I thought I could start again. But I see now, the past lives in him. And it will never disappear until I face it." But Daniel shook his head. His voice was quiet, but sharp as glass. "The past doesn't live in me. The pain does. And it's not going away just because you decided to pretend I don't exist." The words hit harder than any blow. The groom staggered slightly, his breath heavy. The hall was filled with an unbearable silence again. The bride, her hands trembling, looked at Daniel, then at the man beside her. And in her eyes, there was no longer just fear, there was heartbreak, there was doubt, and there was a question she hadn't dared to ask yet. How could she marry a man who caused so much pain to his own son? The silence stretched, pressing down on everyone. Daniel lowered the microphone slowly, his body shaking from the storm of emotions. His truth was spoken. His pain was no longer hidden. And yet, in that silence, the question remained, what would his father do now? The silence inside the hall felt endless. Daniel's words still echoed, heavy and sharp, "The pain doesn't live in the past. It lives in me." The boy stood with his head lowered, his small body trembling after pouring out years of hidden hurt. The bride wiped her tears with shaky hands, her heart torn between the child's honesty and the man she thought she loved. All eyes now turned toward the groom. His son had spoken. His lies had been uncovered. The woman he was about to marry was looking at him with fear and doubt. And the crowd, their whispers were knives slicing through the air. This was no longer a wedding. It was a trial. And he was the man on trial. The groom, Michael, finally took a step forward. His knees felt weak, his chest heavy. He looked at his son, at the boy who had once clung to his hand when learning to walk, the boy whose laughter he had once carried on his shoulders. Memories he had buried came rushing back with painful force. "Daniel," his voice broke as he spoke the name. For a moment, he couldn't say anything else. Daniel lifted his head slowly, his eyes red from crying, but still burning with the fire of truth. He didn't speak, but his silence screamed louder than words. Michael turned toward the bride. His lips trembled. "I need to tell you everything," he said quietly. His voice carried through the silent hall. "Not because I want to save this wedding. Maybe it's already too late. But because my son is right. Lies ruin lives more than truth ever can." The bride's tears slid down her face. She didn't move. She waited. Michael swallowed hard. His chest rose and fell heavily as he faced the room. "Yes. I had a family before. A wife. A son. I loved them, but I failed them. I was young, selfish. I wanted success, I wanted freedom. And when life became hard, when responsibilities weighed me down, I made the worst choice of my life. I walked away." Gasps filled the hall again. Some guests shook their heads. Others stared at him with anger and disappointment. Michael's voice cracked. "I thought leaving would give me peace. I told myself I'd come back when I was ready, when I had more to offer. But days turned to months, months to years. And every day I stayed away, it became harder to face the truth. So I buried it. I buried them." His shoulders sagged as tears filled his eyes. "I told myself Daniel was too young to remember. I told myself his mother would move on. But those were lies I told to protect myself, not them. The truth is, I broke them. I broke my son. And nothing I do can erase that." Daniel's chest rose sharply at those words. His small hands tightened around the microphone, his lips pressed together, but he didn't interrupt. Michael wiped his face with his hand, but the tears wouldn't stop. He looked at Daniel directly now, his voice trembling. "You're right, son. I wasn't there. I missed your birthdays, your first words, your first steps. I missed being your father. I missed everything. And I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve to even stand here today. But I need you to know," his voice cracked completely. "Leaving you was the worst mistake of my life. And I have carried that guilt every single day." The bride's breath hitched. The guests shifted in their seats, the tension pulling them deeper into the moment. Michael turned toward the bride again. "When I met you, I thought I could start over. I thought I could finally be the man I wasn't before. But I see now. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I should have trusted you to see me not just the man I am now, but the man I once was. I thought hiding the past would protect us. But lies don't protect. They destroy." His voice broke again, tears streaming freely. "If you choose to walk away from me right now, I won't blame you. You deserve honesty. You deserve someone who carries no secrets. And I am not that man." The bride's lips trembled as she covered her mouth with her hand. Her gown shimmered under the lights, but her eyes shimmered with tears. Michael looked at his son once more. His hand shook as he reached out slightly, not to grab, not to force, but simply to show his longing. "Daniel, I can't erase your pain. I can't give back the years I stole from you. I can only stand here and say I am sorry. Not with excuses. Not with promises I may fail. Just with the truth. I am sorry." The hall was filled with sobs now, soft, hidden sobs from strangers who felt the raw honesty tearing through the room. Daniel's lips parted. His small body trembled. For the first time since he stood up, he didn't know what to say. The anger in his chest battled with the part of him that had always, secretly, hoped his father would say these words. The bride wiped her tears, staring at the man she loved. She saw his guilt, his regret, his brokenness. But she also saw his courage to finally face the truth. And for the first time since Daniel had spoken, the hall was not silent with judgment. It was silent with something else: expectation. Would the son forgive? Would the bride stay? Would the truth heal, or would it destroy everything? Michael's knees buckled slightly, and he dropped down onto one knee. He wasn't proposing. He wasn't begging for marriage. He was kneeling in front of his son. His voice shook as he whispered, loud enough for all to hear, "I am not asking you to forgive me, Daniel. I am only asking you to let me try. Let me try to be a father again." The boy's eyes filled with tears. His lips trembled. His small fingers loosened around the microphone. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The hall was silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't heavy with anger anymore. It wasn't filled with judgment. It was thick with waiting for the boy to speak, waiting for the bride to decide, waiting for an ending no one had expected at this wedding. Daniel stood frozen, his small body trembling. The microphone slipped from his hand and clattered softly against the floor. Everyone jumped at the sound, but Daniel didn't even notice. His eyes were locked on the man kneeling in front of him. His father. The boy's chest rose and fell quickly, his breathing unsteady. He wanted to scream. He wanted to cry. He wanted to believe. All at once, his heart pulled him in every direction. Michael's eyes never left his son. Tears kept streaming down his face, but he didn't wipe them away anymore. He stayed kneeling, vulnerable, exposed, waiting for the boy's answer. Finally, Daniel's lips parted. His voice was shaky, almost too soft to hear. "Why now?" The room held its breath. Michael swallowed hard. "Because I was a coward before. Because I thought hiding was easier than facing the truth. But you gave me no choice today. You forced me to look at what I've done. And maybe it took your courage to wake mine." Daniel blinked through his tears. His hands clenched at his sides. "You don't know what it was like," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Every night, waiting. Every birthday, hoping. Every time I saw another kid with his dad. I wondered why mine didn't want me." Michael's body shook as his sobs broke through. You're right. I don't know what it was like for you. I can only imagine, and it breaks me. But I want to spend the rest of my life trying to understand. If you let me. The boy's lips trembled. His anger was still there, but beneath it, something else stirred, a tiny spark he had buried long ago. The part of him that still wanted a father. Before he could answer, the bride suddenly stepped forward. Her gown brushed against the floor as she moved between them. Tears stained her cheeks, her hands trembling as she reached out toward Michael. I fell in love with you, she said softly, her voice shaking but clear. Not because you were perfect, but because I saw kindness in you. I saw a man who cared. I never knew this part of you, the broken part. But today, she paused, her chest rising as she steadied herself. Today I saw something even deeper. I saw a man finally brave enough to tell the truth. Michael looked up at her, his eyes wide with guilt and hope. She turned her head toward Daniel, her gaze tender. And I saw a boy who was stronger than any adult in this room. Daniel, your voice changed everything. Your truth saved this day from being built on lies. Daniel stared at her, uncertain, his tears falling silently. The bride's lips trembled as she looked back at Michael. I don't know if I can marry you today. Not after this. But I do know this, I don't want to walk away from you. Not if you're ready to face your past. Not if you're ready to fight for your son. Whispers rippled through the hall again, but softer this time, filled with awe instead of judgment. Michael lowered his head, overwhelmed. I'll fight every day, he whispered. For him. For the truth. For us. Daniel's small voice cut through the air again. If I let you try, if I let you back into my life, you can't leave again. Ever. Michael's heart nearly stopped. He looked up at his son, his eyes burning. I swear to you, Daniel. I will never leave again. Not for anything. You are my son. You always were. And I will prove it every day, if you let me. The boy's body shook as sobs broke free. Before he could think, before he could stop himself, he took a step forward, then another. And then he threw himself into his father's arms. The hall erupted in cries and gasps. Some clapped, some covered their mouths, some simply cried. Michael caught his son tightly, his arms wrapping around the small body that fit so perfectly against him, the body he had longed to hold for years. He buried his face in his son's hair, whispering through his sobs, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, thank you for giving me this chance. Daniel cried into his father's chest, his small fists gripping his shirt as if afraid to let go. The bride stood over them, her hands covering her mouth as tears of relief and hope fell down her face. For the first time that day, she smiled, a trembling, broken smile, but a real one. The guests rose from their seats. Some clapped. Some prayed. Some simply held their loved ones tighter, touched by the raw truth they had just witnessed. No one in that hall would ever forget this wedding. Not because of a dress or a song or a ceremony, but because of the moment when a boy's courage forced a man to tell the truth, and that truth gave birth to a second chance. When the noise finally settled, the officiant cleared his throat, his voice soft. Perhaps, today is not about a wedding. Perhaps it is about a family finding its way back to each other. Michael and Daniel slowly pulled apart, though Michael's hands never left his son's shoulders. Daniel wiped his face with his sleeve, his eyes red but shining. The bride stepped forward and touched Daniel's cheek gently. No matter what happens with us, she whispered, I promise you, you will never be left behind again. Daniel looked at her, surprised by her words, but something in his heart softened. Michael stood, his hand still holding his son's. He looked at the bride, his voice breaking. The choice is yours. If you want to walk away, I won't stop you. But if you stay, we start this life honest. Together. All of us. The bride's lips trembled. She looked at the father. Then the son. And slowly, through her tears, she nodded. I'm not walking away, she whispered. The hall erupted with applause and cries of relief. The officiant's voice carried over the noise. Then let this day be remembered, not as the day of broken vows, but as the day truth gave birth to love again. And with those words, the ceremony continued, not perfect, not flawless, but real. The boy stood between them as they said their vows. And though scars remained, though the past could not be erased, the future stood open before them, a future built not on lies, but on truth. For the first time in years, Daniel smiled. And for the first time in years, his father smiled back.